to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a Baller.
Welcome in. It's Wednesday, May 27th, you Dynasty folks. I'm Kyle Borganoni, and I'm joined, as always, by Matthew Betz.
Sounded very radio-esque of you. Hey, everybody out there listening. May 27th, Dynasty players.
Dude, I had a radio show back in the day.
You did?
In college.
I mean, who knew all these years later? You were preparing for this moment way back when. You said that was in college?
It was my friend Dustin and I who actually ended up like doing radio broadcasting and then ended up like being a reporter for the local, like, I think it was in Charlotte. But like he went somewhere and I'm here.
He did something with his life. And you're just in your mom's basement talking about target shares and yards per out run. And I mean, your mother must be so disappointed.
My parents are actually, my dad's the one that's like, I knew you'd get into sports statistics. I knew that this would be your life. I could tell from an early age. Maybe there's a little bit of revisionist history, but the part of this was like always in my DNA. And there's probably people listening right now saying, I hate you guys. I want to be able to talk about football as a living, and you guys are a bunch of turds. Who gave you the platform to talk about football and Dynasty fantasy football all the time?
I don't know. I can't believe they did. I thought they'd cancel us by now, Kyle, but here we are. It's so funny. I was obviously making fun of you and how your parents would be very disappointed. Meanwhile, on the other side, I went to physical therapy school. My parents were like, you're doing this now? Okay. Okay, cool. So yeah, you know, it's fine. Christmases are fine. It's not a thing. Don't worry about it.
I remember the conversation going to college and picking my major, which my major, I don't know if you knew this part. You haven't looked at my resume in a while, have you?
It's been a minute.
Okay. It says that I got a degree. So I got my undergrad and then I went to grad school and I got my master's in teaching. So I was a teacher for a while. But my undergrad is rhetoric.
I didn't even know that was a thing.
You know, in most schools, it's like communications or speech communications, which for a lot of people is like the football degree that people get just to like get through college. But I would say that it has helped me over time develop conversations as a writer and somehow as a podcaster. So my parents were not happy because they did the same thing. They're like, I did not know that was a degree.
You're like, I'm finding myself, you know, in college. I'm trying to figure out life. I'll study rhetoric. No one knows what that means, but I'm going to study it.
Yeah, and obviously the podcasting industry has changed a lot. I think about even when Andy, Mike, and Jason started things in 2015, like nobody cared about podcasting. There wasn't like a thing that you jumped into. So weird world we live in. And on this episode, Betz and I are going to dive deep into the Ultimate Draft Kit and give you some teams and their trajectories in Dynasty. So we're going to look at a couple of teams that I think are at a turning point of what you can do with a couple players. It's one thing to look at rankings lists. So if you're one of those people who's like, just give me the ranking for the player, that's a starting place. But we're going to talk about a team's trajectory, where they're going maybe this year, and then what are the contracts moving forward and how you can kind of position yourself to trade away players, to acquire them, and what to do. And the example we gave last year on this episode were the Washington Commanders. It's crazy to think about now, but after that rookie year of Jayden Daniels, they were the hotness, and yet their contracts for the team suggested they were going to have to start all over. You know, all the olds, Eckler, Debo, Ertz, like all of those guys we knew were going to be at the end of their contracts. Even Brian Robinson Jr., who eventually was, you know, off the team. But like things change over time, and then you can see Jayden Daniels, I know he had an injury-filled year, but the team feels so different a year later and who we're talking about. And even a year from now, I don't know if any of those running backs will matter for dynasty purposes on that team. So things can change a lot.
You watch your mouth, Kyle, talking about Penn State legend, Katron Allen, okay? Electric athletic profile. I mean, his
six round pick.
The speed is just, you know, you can't coach that. But you're right. It's just so wild to think about what that team was and kind of where they're going. And it still feels like they've got holes on the roster, right? Because like when we were talking about them on this show last year, the conversation was like, I would just be stashing these rookies, talking about the 2025 class, because it's like, dude, who knows what happens next year? The depth charts are wide open. And, you know, Bill is kind of hanging on. We'll see. Bill's hanging on. The other guy is not.
I feel like we haven't done that in a while.
Okay. Man, last summer was the summer of Bill. Was kind of one of the guys that's like, he still has value right now. And that could be completely gone, in just 5 or 6 months. But right now, that's looking okay. The other rookie wide receivers, not really. But at the same time, like, they didn't really replace meaningful production at the wide receiver position. So, yeah, they're an interesting team. We'll see how it works out. They're relying a lot on Jayden to elevate this offense.
I wanted to give one quick announcement at the top. This is your last chance if you want to pre-order the 2026 Ultimate Draft Kit. It comes out June 1st, which is this upcoming Monday. And all the hard work that our team has put into it, hopefully, Betz, behind the scenes, you've been working. I need to do a local visit for HR purposes to see if you've actually followed through.
I've actually done nothing. Just waiting for it to get done, and then the last second be like, Kyle, I need help. And then you just do it all. Yeah, I've done nothing this year, so it's been great.
Nice. June 1st, that comes out. I mean, I'm adding up right now the word count of everything. It'll be around 90,000 words, which is a short novel. But on top of that, you get all the projections from Andy, Mike, and Jason, which are team-level projections we'll reference today. You also have direct access to the Dynasty Pass, something that we've referenced a ton on the show. So the startup rankings we'll talk about today. Like I was looking earlier, we'll talk about Jaylen Waddle. It's like I'm trying to figure out what is the bull case for him. And then what if he's just fine in Denver? Because we've kind of seen this wide receiver room change over a couple of times of like, well, Troy Franklin had a moment, Pat Bryant had a moment, Courtland Sutton is who he is. So you can see all those startup rankings. You can compare them to others at ultimatedraftkit.com if you want to do that. And I did have a question from the website. So if you want to go to fantasyfootballers.com, you can submit a question. And I thought this would start our conversation today. It's from Brady in Colorado. He says, "Sup, ballers. How would you handle acquiring running back depth pieces in Dynasty? What do I do about backups? Who are some names worth kicking the tires on in trades?" And he even went into detail, some of his roster of like, he has some studs, but like, should I go about acquiring the backups for these players? So he mentioned he had Gibbs. Should I go get Pacheco? Or if you have Genty, should you get Mike Washington? Or if you have Josh Jacobs, should you go after any of the backups there? Because we don't know who it is. So let's first start of how do you handle acquiring running back depth pieces in Dynasty? Because everybody needs them. Like every single team in your league needs depth.
Yeah, that is the issue here, is that there's often a supply and demand problem. And so when you go to your league mates and you're saying, hey, I want to trade for fill in the blank running back, you expect to pay a premium most often just because of that running back scarcity that exists. And when you think about like fantasy, even like, 4 or 5 years ago, it felt like there were way more committee situations, and not just like I know who the backup is, but this guy also has a role and maybe I could get him super cheap as the pass catcher in a full PPR format. Generally speaking, like those kind of backfields they're not gone, but there's fewer of them, I would say, than there were 4 or 5 years ago. So it makes that situation even more difficult to acquire running backs that you actually feel confident enough to say, I will get RB2 production, or hopefully better, in my starting lineup, where it's not best ball. You have to decide to start this guy. So that's the first problem, is that there is a premium to acquire that guy. In regards to like the backups and trying to secure depth for your starters, in general, that's not something I'm looking to do right now, where we have so much time before week 1. And it's like, you mentioned the Packers is a good example. It's like, who even knows? Like, what if Josh Jacobs on the first day of training camp gets injured and is out for the year? Do we actually know who's going to fill the role? No.
They don't know.
Nobody knows. But I'll tell you what, I cannot wait for, Kyle. Marshawn Lloyd in the first week, he's going to have like a 4 or 5 day stretch where it's like, is he the RB2? And everybody's back, and then unfortunately he'll get injured. But be careful trying to acquire guys like that or backups like that where you don't actually know who the RB2 is. So I'm not doing that right now at this time of the calendar year. If I am somebody who's trying to go out and get some depth, I'm referencing startup ADP and startup rankings to kind of just see like, are there guys that just it doesn't make sense to go get right now for a value? There's a lot of hot and heavy names in Dynasty that people are obviously super excited about. The young pieces from last year, Genty, Hampton, obviously the studs at the top. You can kind of go down the list of like where you see the tier breaks kind of start to develop of like, these might just be 1 or 2 year window type guys. And if I truly feel like I'm a contender and I don't want to break the bank with a running back to get some RB2 production, maybe some flex value, those are kind of the guys I'm looking at. A couple of names that came to mind off the top of my head. You could pick your favorite Carolina Panther. We're kind of treating that as an ambiguous situation right now. They're probably pretty reasonable to acquire. Dave Montgomery certainly is at the tail end of his dynasty life cycle, but if you are a contender, just on volume alone, I feel like he's going to give you some RB2 production. Those are two names that I don't think will break the bank to get some depth on your roster, but you have to understand if you acquire those pieces, there is a floor and there's some fragility there, especially after the 2026 season.
I'm looking at our rankings right now, which you could do on the app, and it gets really tough because I think of the rosters in some of my leagues, and if you have one of the studs, like nobody's giving up Jahmyr Gibbs, like right now. Like if you're a contender, or you think you're somewhat there because you're saying to yourself, like, I have this valuable commodity, you start to get into RB2 world, and even some of those players, you can make the case these guys are going to finish as a top 10 running back, like Quinshon Judkins. You're not going to be able to acquire this guy because whoever drafted him last year sees the path forward for him despite his injury. Kyren Williams, I have him in a league, and it's one of those things where it's like, I could trade away Kyren because I think Corum's more involved, or I think, the bottom's going to fall out, but Kyron's still relatively young in running back world. He has the contract, and it seems like they trust him, and it seems like this Rams team still has a 2-year window that they're trying to go for it, especially with this Matthew Stafford extension. So I just look at these players in this range, and it's like, I can't really acquire the high-end guys, but then I start scrolling down a little bit and looking at some of the names. Jonathan Brooks was one of them that stood out to me, that I thought there could be more there. And maybe it's nothing. Maybe you're literally trading a second-round pick for nothing, or a third-round pick. The window for me, though, to acquire some of these guys has really passed earlier in the season, especially around rookie drafts, like in rookie draft season, or even the Jacksonville guys, like Bishal Tootin or Chris Rodriguez. You might fall on one side or the other, but the window to acquire Tootin was like, what, March?
Yeah.
Or February?
Before
and now
the
it's
NFL draft,
only
before free agency. Yeah.
It's only going to rise from here. So at the end of the day, I think the problem with Dynasty is that it's a market and it's based on perception. And if people know you are targeting a backup running back, they're going to say, are you onto something? So I would just say the best strategy is to make sure if you're trying to get running back depth, it's not your priority number one in your Dynasty trades. It's part of a package deal. So for instance, let's say, like I have Tyler Algier in a league, and I've been trying to trade him, and someone earlier this offseason, right after Jeremiah Love, offered me a third. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with a third? I'm going to hold this player, but I am going to try to keep marketing him as somebody as we get into the season that could have more of a goal line role. It's just that these guys aren't that valued. They're probably just better as holds at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing too. And on the trade away side of it, it's like, let's just say there's a world that exists where one of these studs goes down for the season, which please don't happen, but if it does, and like Jahmyr Gibbs happens to miss most of the year, everybody knows Isaiah Pacheco becomes the hottest name for the Lions backfield, and he's going to cost an arm and a leg to get in a trade. And it's like, well, if you have that guy and you know that possibility exists, the way that things stand right now, he probably doesn't have that much value. But when that happens, if that happens, he's going to have a ton of value. So if I'm holding Pacheco, I'm like, I'm not selling him to you for a third. Like, what am I going to do with a third? I'm just going to hold him, and if he gets more opportunity than we think, or he gets the Montgomery role, or heaven forbid Gibbs goes down, I'll flip him for a first or something if somebody really wants to come get him. So that is the tricky part too. Trading for running backs in Dynasty, man, it is, I don't say impossible, but it is one of the hardest trades to get through because everybody needs them and everybody knows it.
Yeah, the biggest wins for your roster are finding guys that go from fringe committee to end up being like, this team trusts them as the bell cow.
Like Chase Brown 2 years ago.
Yeah, but that's so hard to be able to identify and find months in advance. And your team or your league mates are not trying to be tricked. So a lot of times they just end up being held. I think, just to give you a couple more running backs that I think are acquirable, that are veterans and not sexy, but throw into deals. Rico Dowdle, I think, is one. Kenneth Gainwell is another one that I would be interested in. And then I don't mind if you want to find Ramondre Stevenson a spot on your roster if you're looking for flex type value. I don't love the long-term aspect of any of these guys, so please hear me out. I'm not saying trade for 28-year-old Rico Dowdle as the primary piece. But if you're trying to acquire an RB4, that's really what you're trying to get here, a 3 or a 4 for your roster. Like, you need to include them in a deal so that it's not actually sacrificing the best part of your roster. You're not like, the opportunity cost of acquiring a running back as a depth piece should not cost you a starting spot on your roster.
For sure. Yeah, I agree with those names too. I think actually both Pittsburgh backs, Jaylen Warren and Rico, I think are both interesting. Also throw out too, like if you definitely know you're a top 3 or 4 team in your league, you don't mind parting with a late second. Like the life cycle is gone on Aaron Jones. But for this year, like you're probably going to play him a few weeks, right? Like Jordan Mason is not really a pass catcher. They kind of did the Mason thing and then moved away from him. And like they trusted Aaron Jones. They trusted him a lot, actually. And then DeMond Claiborne's like the only addition in this backfield via the draft. And that was a very late day 3 guy. So obviously, if you trade for somebody like that, you have to understand this is for this season only. But again, if you're a contender, you're looking for depth, for bye weeks, for injuries, that is another name that makes a lot of sense to me.
And the reason I was looking at the list why we didn't share the sexiest of names at the running back position is because we didn't have the position replenished through the draft.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, just going through, it's like I could take a shot at Jonah Coleman as he was a 4th round pick. Like, Emmett Johnson's an interesting name, but these are all like dart throws that you hopefully took in your rookie draft and you're not counting on them to be a thing. If anything, if they hit this year or if they give you, flex-worthy weeks, congratulations. That's not the expectation for this class.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll talk about a couple of teams. All right, before I hit the drop, I want to emphasize this word. When I first started with Fantasy Footballers, I know, Betz, you could probably say the same thing. One of the slogans of the company is that we want to take a holistic approach to fantasy football. And I just love that when we talk about Dynasty, we can use a bunch of different markets to inform this. So Betz and I on the DFS and betting podcast talk about win totals for teams. Or, for best ball, we kind of talk about a sentiment of right now, this is how the market feels. And we can talk about some of those things, and then in Dynasty kind of layer them over each other to get a picture of teams. So at the end of the day, I want to talk about players from like 4 or 5 different angles to inform like who they are, their contracts, all that other stuff. So it's just really important to me when we talk fantasy football that we're thinking of this holistically, not just like here's this raw ranking of one player at this exact moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And then at the same time too, like on this episode with these names and these teams, we're trying to think not just this year, but also like forecasting what could this look like in a year if X, Y, and Z happen, or just asking questions of what could go wrong or right for a team or a group of players depending on the situation this year. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And like I said, thinking through this in a range of outcomes is obviously the best way to do this from any form of fantasy, whether it's redraft or dynasty, but really trying to think about what happens this year and how does it affect the market next year is the key to this episode.
I was driving in the rain because it's been raining a lot recently, and I was thinking about Michael Thomas, or as we used to call him on the show, Michael Thomas.
Michael Thomas.
And I was just thinking like, man, in Dynasty, in a startup, I remember years ago, it's like, is there any better value? Is there anything more valuable than Michael Thomas? And at the time, if you would have asked me, here is Michael Thomas and here's who he will be for the next 4 or 5 years, I would have been like, I mean, this dude's going to see 150 targets until they carry him off the field every single year, no matter what. This is the dude. And it wasn't just like this was the value that we all perceive for this player. It was like just slowly eroding away. But then in Dynasty, you're like, well, if they just put him on the field, this guy can still be elite. And then it was gone. It just completely evaporated.
That made me so sad to remember those days. I mean, I appreciate the good times, but like how quickly it just was gone because of the injury. Pour one out.
Yeah, and it's more of just a tale. You can give a good side and a bad side for, these cases, but in Dynasty, we are perceiving value of what we think at the time, and so we try not to be dogmatic about these players. So we'll talk about a couple teams. Let's get into it.
Dynasty Download.
That's a fun drop.
I like that one.
We don't use it as much anymore. We used to have a segment, but I guess we have a whole podcast about it now. Betz and I are each going to bring up a couple teams. I'll bring up one from the NFC, and we'll go back and forth. I want to start with the Packers because the game we've been playing for a while is we rotate their wide receivers. It'll be Dobbs this week. Reed has a blow-up game. Watson has a blow-up game. And it's been a tough ride. If you've been very segmented or you've been dogmatic of this is the best Packers wide receiver, If you would have asked anybody over the last 4 or 5 years, who is the Packers wide receiver you want in Dynasty, everybody could have a different answer, and everyone was probably right for a second, and everybody was probably wrong for a second. So, before we talk about this team's trajectory, I'll look at some of Jason's projections. Do you feel like that is still the overarching question that people have about this team is which one of these wide receivers between Watson, Matthew Golden, and Jayden Reed is the wide receiver one or the one you want in Dynasty? Is that still a question?
That's tough to answer because so much of last year was clouded by, I think, a surprise season from Christian Watson. Like, if you remember coming off the ACL, most of us thought, like, okay, this probably isn't going to be a full-time player, slow to return off the injury, maybe he's not himself. And to his credit, when he came back, he was incredible. And he was really good for a big chunk of the season. At the same time, Jayden Reed missed essentially the entire season with his broken collarbone. And then Matthew Golden, obviously we know, has a not ideal track record so far in the NFL and not a great production profile to go with it. And generally speaking, those are not situations you want to buy. But at the same time, they've kind of cleared the deck for all three guys, right? Like you mentioned, Dobbs is gone, Dontavian Wicks is gone. Even I think Malik Heath is gone. Like, there's, in theory, some names behind them. Sky Moore's on this roster.
I love that, by the way.
Savion Williams was a rookie last year. He's kind of a gadgety type guy. But like, when you think about just who's going to run the most routes this year, those are the three names at the top of the list. But the problem is neither guy has ever really done it for a full season. So that I think that is a key for the Packers this year, is trying to figure that out and just think through that situation. Because, I mean, the market is saying the Packers will be good. Historically, under Matt LaFleur, they've been very good. I think it's 6 the last 7 years, I believe. They're in the top 10 in touchdowns per game. So, like, you want this offense, but at the same time, which guy is it going to be, Kyle? Tell the people, who is it going to be?
You run into a problem when you start projecting a team like the Packers because they have functioned quite well. You'd mentioned their offense without hyper-targeting one guy in this Jordan Love offense. So, like, the last couple years, they're not seeing guys that have to hit 20+% target share. I remember 2 years ago, we were analyzing the team. It's like, this is a wild thing to be able to say this is a double-digit win team, and no one's really commanding more than 18% of the targets. And I look at our projections right now, and Christian Watson is the one that Jason has at the top, but he's never really been that guy in his career, right? So we are making an assumption that this is the player and what he will be going into his 5th year in the NFL. He's only been a top 24 wide receiver in 31% of his career games. And here's the part that I think with Christian Watson, like, we can project, big playability and touchdowns. But if you look at his splits with Tucker Kraft on the field and Jayden Reed on the field the last 2 years, it is a stark difference. With Tucker Kraft on the field, I mean, he's averaging 6.5 fantasy points per game. When he's off the field, it doubles to 12. Same thing with Reed. His yards per game, all the stuff. So if we think that Tucker Kraft makes his way back, we'll talk about him too, then I think it's just a hard thing for me to project this guy is going to see 22% of the targets. And then you're asking him and Golden, if you like him instead of Watson, to basically be super efficient on a 18 to 19% target share. So I have a hard time buying into Watson. He's entering the final year of his contract, which has a ton of incentives. I feel like Andy, Mike, and Jason are a little bit higher than me. So for Dynasty purposes, like, Watson feels like a player I just won't touch because I feel like there's enough risk that outweighs the reward of a player. I don't even know if he's on this team next year.
Yeah, he's so tricky because, like, I remember having this conversation about the Packers wide receivers basically a year ago in the offseason at some point. I remember looking at Christian Watson's contract, and we said, going into the year off of the ACL this past season, entering 2025, he's set to hit free agency. So it's a scary proposition, right? Coming off major injury, set to hit free agency. And then I think it was during the season, they gave him that kind of 1-year extension. But at the same time, that's not enough to make me be like, okay, he's here for the long run. They trust him as the guy. Man, and this is what's so fun about these conversations, because I talk out of both sides of my mouth, and it's like, you're not going to put Jayden Reed on the perimeter for 90% of his snaps, right? And if Matthew Golden's target earning potential is as capped as the data says so far, 1 year in the NFL, sure, but in college didn't really have that to him. So it's like, you can see why people are excited about Christian Watson, right? You don't have to squint. So yeah, he's tricky, man. I think for this year, he's the exact type of player, now that I'm thinking about this, that I'd be in redraft, right? Where you think about like where he'll probably go. I don't have ADP in front of me, but like a middle round wide receiver where if in redraft doesn't work, you can just move on, right? It's not going to sink your team if your 6th round pick doesn't hit. But in Dynasty, if you're trying to trade an asset to go get him or something like that, that really could be a hindrance to your team. So he's a guy that I probably will be more in redraft than in Dynasty, thinking about how it could go right or wrong. So if I have him and people are like hot and bothered by Christian Watson, like there is a chance that from this point moving forward, this is the max that his value will be. I hope that's not the case because he's very fun and he's electric, but that is definitely a possibility.
That's the point, is in this market-based game, I feel like we're at a point now where I don't see his value increasing. Maybe it does when he starts the season off hot and then you can maybe trade him or shop him. But there is a possibility that Matthew Golden ends up leveling up this year. And just to give you some numbers this past year, he only averaged 18 total routes per game. So it wasn't on the field a ton. A 10.5% target share, was targeted on just 17% of his routes. So like, you can see what he did in the playoffs and see why he was drafted to be this player. And we both are projecting Watson and Golden to be the starting outside wide receivers with Jayden Reed in there on 3 wide receiver sets. Problem is, when you get inside the red zone, things shift a bit in how they function, and we'll have to see Tucker Kraft coming back. But like a lot of teams will then go into 12 personnel, and then it's kind of like, is Golden the guy? Watson's been a red zone guy or at least a touchdown guy. So I just like the price better on Golden, somebody that we've talked down about, and I think we brought that up multiple times this offseason. I don't like betting on this type of profile, but if the price is this low for Golden, then I'm willing to do it. But I think the window to do that would have been around your rookie draft and just saying, hey, I like Golden maybe better than this rookie I would have taken in the 2nd round, and I'll just kind of flip him there. But what do you do with Reed? He just signed a 3-year extension. And so some people are like, this is it. See, they really like this guy. And it's maddening. If you've ever had this guy on your roster before in any format, it is terrifying to start him.
Yeah, he's like, man, this is a cop-out. Better in best ball, right? Like you don't want to have to click the button to put him in your lineup, but I believe he's a very talented player. The problem has always been playing time, route share, and the ability to get on the field in 2 wide receiver sets in a league that is slowly kind of morphing into, like, NFL is a copycat league, right? So we see these trends where it's like on defense, you had the 2 high shell look, era for like 3 years in a row, and people got all into that and people started copying. Now we have these kind of more innovative play callers doing the heavier personnel sets. The league is starting to slowly draft more tight ends in the 2nd round and 3rd round of the NFL draft. And it's kind of slowly doing that. And eventually we'll leave this window, and I'm sure it'll be different in 4 years. But right now, like, his archetype doesn't fit kind of that movement. And so he's a tricky player because when he's on the field, I believe he is a very talented player and he is very effective. And he can do things that Christian Watson can't do. He can do things that Matthew Golden potentially can't do either. At the same time, like I said, you're not going to line him up on the perimeter on an every down type of situation. So his fantasy value will always be capped as long as that is the case. I've talked myself into situations before where it's like, maybe this is the year they do that with Reed. And I feel like after a certain point in a player's career, you kind of have to stop thinking that way. Like, we're entering a window where it's like, he hasn't done it yet. Not saying we should close our mind to the opportunity that it might happen. I just think the possibility of that happening is far lower than I thought it could have been 2 years ago. If they really wanted Jayden Reed to be an every down player, I think they would have made that happen 2 years ago when he had his hot start as a rookie and he really came on strong. And since then, that just has not been the case. So I'd love to be wrong about that, but I just think after a certain number of years in the league, generally speaking, unless you change teams, like, play callers and OCs and the staff kind of know you and they know your strengths and they're going to use you that way. And again, he's just not a 90% route guy on the perimeter. It's just not his game. So his value will always be capped. I hope I'm wrong on that, though.
This team is efficient, like, across the board. They run the ball a ton, but like passing wise, they've been efficient. And Jordan Love has kind of lived off that. He was number 1 in the league in yards per attempt on 3rd down last year. And I just look at the passing pie for these 3 guys, Watson, Golden, and Reed, and none of them so far have been huge target earners. Christian Watson saw 20% of the targets in his games played. That's a career high. It's been at 16%. Reed was down to 13% in his games played last year. He's averaged 4.8 targets per game. Of those 3, I think you're saying that Watson would be the guy if he was going to jump somewhere to like 22, 23%?
I would think so.
It just feels like I don't want to buy, like Reed's on the wrong offense to be able to be a fantasy star. In a double flex league, sure, start him as your wide receiver 4. That's fun. But the experience is so up and down that it's really hard to count on him. And it's hard to then make that jump just because of the contract and say, well, now he's going to be on the field every single down. So at the end of the day, I just think I'm not going to buy into anybody other than Golden at his price. And then my other question is about Jordan Love. Is he kind of capped as like he had that career season where he was the QB5, and kind of since then I feel like he's capped at like QB 10 to 15 range for the rest of his career.
He's so interesting because
aside from like an outlier touchdown season.
Yeah, of course. Any pocket passer can get there if they have an outlier touchdown rate. He's always been so efficient. Like looking at EPA per play, EPA per drop back, some of those advanced quarterback metrics, he's always there. Like I think Jordan Love is very good, but I don't know what it is. Like Matt LaFleur seems hesitant to kind of cut it loose and that be the identity of the offense. Like they are so content to give Josh Jacobs the ball for 4 yards, 3 yards on first down and just kind of stay on schedule and do the old school stuff and then hit you with shot plays and hit you with efficiency off of it. So I don't know that we're ever going to see the game plan be, go be Joe Burrow, go drop back 44 times a game. Like that's in wild game scripts. Of course it can happen in 1 week, but like as the actual identity of the offense, I don't know that they're ever going to be that, or at least not in the short term. So that's the tricky part because from a fantasy standpoint, I think he has the tools to be an awesome fantasy quarterback. I don't know that we get enough volume for it to really be like a true difference-making season. And obviously, he's not necessarily known as an elite rusher, so that's not going to help his case. But yeah, I'm a big Jordan Love fan as like a real-life NFL quarterback. At the same time, I don't know if there's enough volume to make it be a situation where you're counting on him outside of Superflex leagues to be in your lineup every week.
I'm looking at Jason's projections right now. He has the Packers with 535 attempts, which is like middle in the league, like just almost like dead center. And I just have a hard time seeing them. Like Jordan Love could throw for 4,300 yards.
Yeah,
like
I think so.
I just don't think they're asking him to. And because of that, he kind of sits in this range in Dynasty Startup where he's a fine QB2. And you'll get some moments where he can be a top 10, but like that's kind of the range he settles. And then Josh Jacobs, last thing I'll say about him, I think you need to wait for early season schedule to get some touchdowns if you want to trade him. Now is not the time to do it, but they are favored in their first 6 games. So my advice for that is like week 2, the Jets. Week 3, Falcons in a primetime game at Lambeau. After that game, that's when you trade away Josh Jacobs.
100 yards, 3 touchdowns incoming.
So are you on board with that with Josh Jacobs?
It's so tough. We just talked about the running back landscape, right? It's like if you're a contender, like you're obviously holding him. At the same time, he's a running back that scares me from a dynasty outlook where for this year, he projects well, obviously, but it's beyond this year. What does that look like? Who knows? He's kind of hitting that age in dynasty where you start to ask those questions and you start to consider, I'm not saying this player will be bad, but do I want to maximize my return in a trade on this player? I think that window will close pretty quickly on Josh Jacobs, where you'll have that window right now in this season coming up. So if you're not a contender, I don't mind that approach at all, because I do think you're looking next year, you're not going to get the same thing you probably would for a trade of Josh Jacobs.
All right, let's stay in the NFC. We start with the Packers, and let's bring up the Buccaneers, because you and I were talking off air. This is an intriguing team that's really at the crossroads because they're post Mike Evans, and we are kind of left asking the question of, was this team propped up by Liam Cohen's play calling, by Dave Canales' play calling, and now they're having to start all over again with Zach Robinson now at OC? We're kind of asking some questions about Baker. It's like they fell apart in the second half, just completely fell apart. So where do you want to start the conversation about this team? Because we're going to work our way through pretty much everybody, but there's so many names to talk about.
Yeah, they're so difficult to figure out what this offense is going to look like and kind of who you want in fantasy as a result. Let's start with the wide receivers. I think that's the most interesting conversation. I think Bucky is very intriguing. We'll talk about the running backs, but I mean, this is the first time ever we're going to see this Bucs team as we know it without Mike Evans. Like, that's huge, obviously. And when you think about how are they replacing him, there was a good article that came out recently from Jenna McClain, who covers the team, and basically talking about like, there's two options here. Do we think that they go with Ted Hurst, the rookie, as like the true X receiver? Not saying that he will replace Mike Evans from a production standpoint, obviously. That's very hard to do. But more from a playing time standpoint. And it's like, well, if that scenario plays out and he earns that trust and he earns that role, how do you get Godwin, Egbuka, and McMillan on the field? Is it just a rotation? What does that look like? That's a major question. If it's not Hurst, does Zach Robinson say, okay, let's not have that traditional set. Let's just have 3 or 4 guys that are versatile, that you can move all over the formation and not have to have a this is where you play type of situation. And for a younger play caller, you would think that's kind of how it would work out. Like, I don't know what your thoughts are, Kyle. You can talk to this more than I can probably about the Falcons and Zach Robinson's kind of tenure there. But I do remember like there being moments of like, I wish there was more from this offense. And at the same time, with Drake London, there would be a lot of fun stuff, especially in the red zone when they move him into the slot, create those mismatches. If he can bring some of that, and maybe that's Godwin week, maybe that's an Egbuka week, like I'm kind of into this offense. But at the same time, I was joking with you before the show. I was like, the Falcons in every metric over the last 2 years are just, they're right in the middle, man. They're just average. There's nothing that gets you like overly excited about this one thing. They're like average in explosive play rate, average in EPA, average in scoring. Like they're just the offense. You can't copy and paste like, oh, this is going to be an amazing scheme. The way that we are doing with, it's like, look what Mike McDaniel did with the Dolphins. Like, what could he do with Justin Herbert, right? We're not doing that with this offense because of the limitations of Atlanta. So the wide receivers are fascinating. I think that scheme and usage is one conversation. The other player level conversation is what do you do with Egbuka, who, if you took him in a rookie draft last year, right, through the first 5 or 6 weeks, I mean, you felt like you were on top of the world. And then every week after, you had to keep starting him, but it just was like, punch in the gut after punch in the gut. And obviously, it was a very, very disappointing second half. So where do you want to start the conversation with the wide receivers?
Oh, man. I mean, I'll quickly just say, being stuck in the middle in the NFL, they say it's the best place to be when you want to build a franchise. It's just to not have a winning season for a long time. With Egbuka, like, just to put context in those first 5 games, it was the second most fantasy points all time by a rookie wide receiver. So Puka blew the doors off. Then it was Egbuka, the Neighbors, and Chase. Like, it was a historic start to a career. The problem with this team, if you're looking at just the way that their team lined up, Evans had some injuries, but he is the only one on the team that can like play bully ball. Like when the ball's in the air, he's going to win the contested catch, or he's going to body somebody on a slant. Baker was dead last in the NFL in yards per attempt against man coverage. Like, how bad? Like, he was worse than Dylan Gabriel. Just like historically booty. And then I look at this roster and it's like, well, Ted Hurst could maybe be that guy, like just bigger body, downfield, X receiver. Who else is that guy? Like, and so, like, Godwin's at this point in his career, he's probably going to be more in the slot. Egbuka's probably going to be a Z wide receiver. He's really the key. If they move him around the formation, they bring him in motion, I think this team could be okay. But they're basically asking a lot from McMillan or Hurst to be this guy, considering they don't run as much 12 personnel as they probably should. And I look at the personnel of their team, it's like maybe the best part of this team is if they played Bucky and Gainwell. Like, Gainwell is essentially a wide receiver. Like, he's in the mix. So this team is tough to look at for 2026, but I think you still need to be bullish on Egbuka as a top 15 dynasty wide receiver. He still commanded the targets and still was targeted on a per route basis that if I compare him to all the first round wide receivers of the last decade, it's in the 75th percentile. Like, it's still awesome. It's just that we felt the punch in the gut of the final, 7-8 weeks.
Yeah, and if you look at the splits, right, like obviously the hot start was incredible. Nobody really saw that coming. He had a great camp last year and people were very excited about him, but nobody saw the second most fantasy points ever through the first 5 games happening, of course. And so when that happens, you get this mindset of like, this is the normal for him. This is the expectation. But if you look at some of Baker's numbers, Egbuka's touchdown rate, those were just unsustainable. So we should have expected some regression. It's just that it hit in a way that wasn't like a gradual decline. It was like literally all or nothing. And there was also some factors at play, right? He played through a hamstring injury at times, Egbuka did. There were some rumblings of Baker being banged up. The offensive line was injured last year. So if you just zoomed out You didn't look at any splits first 5 or 6 weeks versus the last 2 months. You just said the entire season. Look at Egbuka's numbers, put him in our formula that we look at in our spreadsheet, and say, like, what are the chances this guy hits in the NFL? This is a rookie wide receiver who was taken in the first round. He averaged 1.75 yards per run as a rookie. If you just told me that, I'd be like, that's probably a pretty good player. Like, maybe he's not going to be Jamar Chase. Nobody really is, right? So it's not fair to compare his start to Chase and Puka and those guys. But, like, if you just put up that efficiency as a rookie and you have first-round draft capital, I would say that guy's probably going to be a pretty good dynasty asset moving forward. So at the end of the year, I was questioning, like, how talented is he actually? Like, what is his role in the NFL? Because when Evans went down, I think they had him doing stuff that he maybe wasn't either ready for or wasn't in the plan. Like, not saying he can't get to that level, but when you lose somebody like that, and Godwin, of course, was in and out of the lineup all season, you don't have the ability to kind of learn the NFL and learn different position at wide receiver in the pros. You're just thrust into it and saying, this is the game plan this week. You have to go do this. So I think now that the dust has settled and we just can kind of take a step back, if there's any fun on Egbuka out there and people are kind of worried about what happened in the last, 2 months, I personally am not buying that that's the normal. Like, am I saying he's going to be the wide receiver he was in the first month of the season? Probably not. Is the truth somewhere in the middle? Probably. And like I said, first round wide receiver with pretty good efficiency, generally speaking, you bet on that, it'll work out more often than not. So now that we have this ambiguous situation and people don't know the target share and they don't know what it's going to look like without Mike Evans, I'm just betting on the young ascending player over. I get Ted Hurst's excitement, okay? Like, he's kind of a fun prospect. Chances are this won't work. He wasn't a great prospect. Like, they don't have high draft capital in him. Chances are it's not going to turn into a prolific fantasy scorer. Jalen McMillan is fine for what he does. Chris Godwin is definitely on the wrong side of kind of his age curve, right? And we have this injury history now. So it's like, man, just if we look back at the end of this year and we're like, remember when we were so worried about Egbuka? That seems so silly in hindsight. I could see that happening. So he's one of those players I'm definitely trying to acquire. Won't be cheap, but I think there's a buying window now that maybe would not have been there if the second half of the season obviously didn't happen.
Right. And if you reverse it, if he started the year off slow and then he finishes with the final 7 weeks on fire, we'd be like, like Luther Burden, right? Is the reverse of that. It's funny how that does to our consciousness. But I have an article that I wrote a while back called Dynasty Wide Receiver Thresholds That Matter. And all it does is just compare. Here's what this guy did in year one. What is the average for the first round? So at least like you get some context. Like, this is better than what CeeDee Lamb did as a rookie on a lot of per route stuff, target share, everything else. And I don't think you forget at the time, it's like, oh man, CeeDee Lamb was a stud all the way through. Like, it took a couple years for him to be, a top 6 wide receiver. But I do want to give you some names with Egbuka because he's such a fun name to talk about. Let me see if I even got the Big Boo drop. I don't even have it in front of me.
Okay.
I'm not. Am I even doing my job?
Do you care?
Oh.
Rookie sensation, wide receiver out of Ohio State, Emeka Egbuka.
Would you rather have in Dynasty Egbuka or Garrett Wilson?
Oh, man, that is tough. I would go Egbuka.
I think I would too, even though Wilson's just a target monster. Egbuka or, this is a tough one, Devontae Smith.
Man, the Eagles are another fascinating conversation. I think for the age difference, I would lean Egbuka, but that's honestly a coin flip.
Yeah, about almost 4 years right there. All right, one more name, Ladd McConkey. We love Ladd.
I'm not quitting on Ladd. I'll go Ladd.
I think I'd go Egbuka.
That's fair. But they're super close. That's really tough.
Okay. All right, and then what? I know that the Ballers have talked about Bucky. If you want to listen to the main show, you can listen to a full conversation about Bucky. My question about him is, what is his role on this team? Because Sean Tucker has been the goal line guy. Bucky had no carries inside the 5. We know Gainwell can be elite as a pass catcher, and he ends up being, like, is Bucky going to be a between the 20s guy? That is so frustrating for fantasy because we know Bucky can hit the long run, but the most valuable targets are inside the red zone. The most valuable carries are inside the 10. And it's like, if he doesn't get those, you're asking for wild efficiency. And he was arguably one of the least efficient running backs last year.
Yes, but also playing through injury at times, right? So then there's that equation. Is that prescriptive or descriptive? I think it's probably more descriptive because he was so efficient as a rookie that I don't think we should say that this last year is who he was. At the same time, we talked about this. It's a market-based game right now. And there's nothing out there right now that's positive on Bucky, right? He's not at OTAs because of the shoulder. There's all this FUD on him from last year. It's like they signed Gainwell. right now, if you're not a believer in Bucky, which I'm not saying you should or shouldn't be, like I think it's fine to not want to be in on him. Now is not the time to trade him, in my opinion. Like you've got to wait for a moment in season, maybe positive camp reports, something like that. Like now is not the time, but this is a good reminder of like what can happen to these day 3 backs after even 1 or 2 good seasons in the league. Like historically, that's generally more often than not, you're not going to always be right on these trades, right? It's a game of probability in fantasy and especially in Dynasty. More often than not, though, on those day 3 backs that hit as rookies, you just have to take a step back and ask yourself, like, can I just get maximum return on this player and kind of wipe my hands clean and move on from it? What could be a murky situation, and that's what happened with Bucky. So do not trade him now. The market cannot be lower on him, but yeah, it's a good reminder for what can happen to day 3 backs in the future.
If you wanted to trade for him, could you get him for a late 2027 first?
I don't know that I would want to do that.
That's I was wrestling with that and saying like the inherent risk is that this is a segmented backfield, and I end up like having a running game that's fine and good, and yet I didn't get the return that I wanted. So I think I would start to poke around and get a second and another young player to see if you can make that work. But it's tough, man.
Yeah.
It's tough because we want to acquire running backs. We don't want to be on the wrong side and then set ourselves back a year. I'm like, I traded for this guy and he's not even one of the main running backs here. So tough team, man. And then Baker was playing through something at the end of the year. Had
to be. He just didn't look right.
Yep. Let's take a quick break. We'll talk about a couple more teams. All right, let's go with the team that had the best record in the AFC this past year. The Denver Broncos went 14-3, but if you're looking based on just scoring differential, 11-6 probably was a little bit better. I mean, they were fortunate in some games. They were tied in 23% of their offensive snaps. So like during the games, 23% of them, that was the highest rate in the league. They were just on the right side of stuff. And if you look at their team's performance, they had the lowest yards per attempt of any 14-plus win team ever in NFL history. So I want to start the conversation about Bo Nix. A year ago in Dynasty circles, Bo Nix would have been the name that you would have said, like, this is going to be the guy for the next 5 to 10 years that is going to be a stalwart as a top 10 quarterback. He ends up being the quarterback 6. And yet, if you had Bo Nix this past year, it did not feel like the quarterback 6. In our consistency rankings, he was like quarterback 16. So week in, week out, it was really, really rough, including 33% of his fantasy points came in just 3 games. So wild season. Where does he slot? And I'll give you some names to compare, but like, what's your outlook on Bo Nix recovering from injury? That's one thing. And then just as a fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, he's tricky because on one hand, you like the weapons, right? Like adding Jaylen Waddle, generally speaking, is a great thing. You have one of, if not the best offensive lines in football. I think a consensus top 5 based off whatever, group you look at. Like this offense is great. They return all 5 starters on the line. We like the scheme. We like Sean Payton. Like I really think there's a good chance we see sustained offensive success from Bo Nix and the Broncos. The problem for me is like, if you think about the way this team is set up and think about how good this defense is, generally speaking, like they're not going to get into a ton of shootouts over the next year or two with the way that this team is set up, or at least they probably don't want to. And so when I think about some of these wild games that he had against like the Giants where they actually had to come from behind, like that's not the norm for the Denver Broncos. So I do feel like his ceiling is probably capped. And when I looked at like some of the average implied team totals that you put together, Kyle, for this season, they're at like 21st or 22nd. I forget the number off the top of my head. Like the market is not saying this is going to be a high scoring offense or a top 10 offense, a top 5 offense. So I'm worried about like the perception on Bo Nix. Like he feels like a fantasy friendly quarterback who's not going to miss. But at the same time, like if just more of the production and the touchdowns come on their ground, or the defense holds up their end of the bargain and they're not in these shootouts, I think Bo Nix could have a fine quarterback 12 season, but like not be a difference maker. So for me, I'm okay with him in Dynasty. I don't know that I'm as excited about maybe the market is how I'd put it.
Yeah, going into last year, this was quarterback routinely seen as like a top 8 dynasty quarterback. I mean, even as high as like QB6 at one point. We have him at QB12 in our startup rankings. And I think that's the issue year to year when you only look at rankings and you say, here's this player, he's going into year 2, like this is going to be a good team. And obviously they responded that way, made it all the way to the AFC Championship game. There's just room for players in the way that they play to regress. So if you look at just some of the metrics behind the scenes, he was 30th among 38 qualifying quarterbacks in off-target rate. He was 24th in completion percentage. But here's the thing, like they had maybe the best offensive line in football. They dealt with some injuries down the stretch, but like he was first in sack rate, meaning like he was sacked the fewest of his dropbacks percentage. But when he was pressured, he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league in yards per attempt when he was pressured. Like down there with Shadur Sanders and J.J. McCarthy in terms of pressure rate, yards per attempt. So I have issues with the way that he plays the game. Like, and how it translates to scoring fantasy points. He runs enough. He's averaged 23 rushing yards per game through 2 seasons. Like that's a fine floor. But I don't think this team needs him to throw the ball 40 times a game for them to be good. And the worst side of Bo Nix is wildly inaccurate throws. And the dude loves being outside the pocket. And it's just over time, that just doesn't add up to being a difference maker. It's my issues always with Caleb Williams is like high-end outcomes. Dude, they were there as a rookie. But they also lead to games where he is so wildly off target, especially outside the pocket, that they don't add up to fantasy points the way that we think for his pass catchers. So that's kind of my concern with like some of the dudes. I like Waddle. I have Waddle in a dynasty league, and he's a hold for me. But like there's a range of outcomes where Waddle's like the wide receiver 22. And it doesn't feel like it moved me forward because I don't think this team needs him to see 150 targets.
The other thing, too, is just like Sean Payton historically he's always loved rotations at the skill group, right? We know the deal with the running backs. It's set in stone. We've known that for years. We saw it last year. We'll see it again this year. But even at like wide receiver, right? Think about recent seasons, like signing little Jordan Humphrey off the street to run routes. And then there was a moment where it was like, this is Courtland Sutton's team. And it's like, no, this is Troy Franklin's team. Oh, wait, remember Marvin Mims? And he'll do this where he like rotates game plans and rotates players in. So when you think about logically, like you send a first-round pick for Jaylen Waddle, you're probably going to use that player, right? Obviously. But at the same time, like nobody should be surprised when it's 3rd and 6 and they have to have it, and all of a sudden you have this like fluky screenplay to like Nate Atkins or whoever it is that's not one of the main guys. Like there will be a rotation here. So I see the high-end outcome for sure because Jaylen Waddle is that type of player. He's electric. But it's been so long, man. It's been so long since we've seen sustained success from Jaylen Waddle for fantasy. So adding in the Knicks concerns, like I think it's highly volatile. I could see, oh, this was great. I could totally see that. I could see it being, like you said, okay, he's wide receiver 24 again. I'm happy I have him, but I'm not like winning my league because of him. So yeah, they're tricky. You mentioned the Bo Nix consistency. I wanted to go back and look just to see like the ups and downs and everything. He was only a top 12 quarterback in 8 games last year, just to kind of speak to that. And there were 3 instances where he was the weekly quarterback 12. So it's like most of the time he wasn't the reason or a huge reason you were winning your matchups, right? It's like he's fine most weeks, and then he had amazing spike weeks.
Those three games.
Right. So yeah, I could see it going a number of directions, man. It's tricky.
When you start to sort out their targets too, like I'm looking at right now, we have the vacated opportunities where you look in the running game and the passing game, like, okay, so who left and what? Like nothing changed for this team. 0% of the targets, 0% of the rush attempts have changed since last year. And then you add in Jaylen Waddle, and the weird thing is like you think of Troy Franklin and Mims as like, okay, well, they're irrelevant now. Like they had valuable bit roles on this team, especially in the screen game, which has kind of been something we know Waddle can be good at. We know what Sutton has been valuable for. I mean, he's been the wide receiver 13, as unsexy as it is, in back-to-back seasons. Okay, over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns in each. Like, that's a valuable role for this team. He's under contract, by the way, for 4 more years. Wild contract for Courtland Sutton. And like Troy Franklin, as silly as he is, he's been a joke on the show. Jason's brought him up. He had the valuable targets last year where like he led this team in inside the 20 targets. He led this team in deep targets. So You can just put him in the Jaylen Waddle role if you want, but he's still going to be a part of the rotation. Same thing with Pat Bryant. So it's an interesting, weird team. They add Justin Jolie, the receiving tight end out of NC State. I feel like this team is going to be better in real life NFL than they are for fantasy.
I think that's a good way to put it, because the production, I do agree with you, will be pretty spread out. I completely forgot about Pat Bryant, to be honest with you. So, yeah, makes sense.
Do you think they forgot about it when they told him they traded for Jaylen Waddle? And he's like, his agent's just like pissed, just absolutely pissed. Are you trying to sell any of these pieces in Dynasty?
That's tricky. I mean, the guy that I would have liked to capitalize on after his rookie year was RJ Harvey. Now the window, I think, is closed to do that at potentially fair value, to the point where it's like, maybe I just want him on my roster now because everybody's so out on him, right? But at the same time, I'm nervous about RJ Harvey long term. There's always guys that you could consider trading away, but like you said, what are you getting, right? Like, who's coming to you for Courtland Sutton? Nobody?
Whoa. I mean, I don't have Courtland Sutton. I'm not.
But you're not getting anything meaningful for him right now, most likely, especially after Jaylen Waddle trade. So the name that I think you could get fair value for and like potentially get a good return on is Bo Nix. But that's league dependent, because in one quarterback leagues, it's just tough to get trades done for quarterbacks. In Superflex, I think you could potentially capitalize there, where I'm not saying he's going to be a bad fantasy scorer. It just, like I said, I think the public perception on him is juiced up by those 3 huge games, but largely he's been a replaceable player in your lineup from a quarterback standpoint.
All right, let me give you a couple of names for Bo Nix. Jordan Love or Bo Nix in Dynasty?
Dang. I'll side with the guy that will run more, and I'll side with Bo Nix.
That's where I am too, but it's tough because, like, Jordan Love, I don't think Bo Nix could lead the league in passing touchdowns. Jordan Love could do that.
Yeah. I think that's right.
30, 35. Dak Prescott, who is about to be 33 years old, or Bo Nix?
Man.
The Ballers love some Dak Prescott.
I know. If I'm a contender, I'd probably lean with Dak.
Okay, one more name here, and this one stopped me in my tracks. Bo Nix or Brock Purdy?
We should have talked about the Niners today. They feel fragile. Like the Niners as we know it, I think, are slowly not gone, but like Kittle's old, Mike Evans is old.
And yet I still trust Shanahan.
Yeah, that's true.
I think I'd take Brock Purdy.
I think I would too.
Because he runs enough, and I think they need him to do more than what they need Bo Nix to do for fantasy purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the quarterback position. Okay, I'm going to bring up the quarterback that is actually right above Bo Nix in our Dynasty Startup rankings. Is Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. And this is a team that we're going to finish talking about here. Lay out to me how this team finished last year, because they won the AFC South. They were 13-4. They were really close against Buffalo in the AFC wildcard game. But we do need to give some context of their second half.
Yeah, the first half, I think, was filled with the growing pains that you might expect from a first-time head coach, a new scheme, a new play caller, and all that sort of stuff. I remember, like, vividly in, like, week 2, there's, like, a screen pass or something like that, or it's just an easy completion to Brian Thomas, and they pan to Cohen on the sideline, and he's, like, hitting his chest. He's like, hit him in the chest. He's, like, yelling at Trevor Lawrence. And there was, like, those growing pain moments, and then coming out of the bye week, dude, I don't know what happened during the bye week, but they found something. They were insane. So they went 9-1 after the bye. They were averaging the second most points per game in the league. They were 7th in EPA per play. And from that bye week on, Trevor Lawrence had a 6.6% touchdown rate. Doesn't sound insanely high, but for Trevor Lawrence, that was a massive leap, because historically, he had been like a below 4% type of quarterback, which is well below league average. So Cohen unlocked Trevor Lawrence, got the best out of him. At the same time, I find myself asking how repeatable that was, because when you think about the teams they played, you know, they beat the Raiders by 1. The Chargers were a good team last year. They beat them, so credit there. They beat the Broncos, credit there. But it's like, man, it was the Cardinals, the Titans twice, the Colts twice, one of which was the game where Jones actually got injured. The other game, Daniel Jones obviously didn't play. It was Phillip Rivers and the Jets. So, like, they beat up on a bunch of bad teams. And now I feel like there's so much excitement on the Jaguars, and I totally understand where it's coming from. But I will just say I was kind of shocked, like, looking at the market expectation for this team from the, like, looking at the betting markets. Like, they're only favored in 8 games based off the look-ahead line. And for a team that was so good last year, you think, how is that possible? Their average implied team total is 18th. So this is a team that was top 10 in touchdowns per game, one of the best scoring offenses in the league, and the market is telling us as far as like the betting futures, like pump the brakes a little bit. And so that has me worried. And at the same time, like we have just ambiguity everywhere on the roster, right? Like running back, we're trying to figure it out. We're not really sure. Wide receiver, we're still doing the how much does Travis Hunter play type of thing. Is Brian Thomas good anymore type of thing? Apparently Parker Washington is the guy. You know, Jacoby Myers got paid. Like, we don't really know how the targets
even
are going
at tight end.
Yeah, Brenton Strange is a totally capable pass catcher. So it's like you start to give all these guys targets, and eventually it kind of feels like the Broncos a little bit, right? Where it's like maybe not the defense as far as the level of play that we'll get there, but just when you spread it out this much, it creates completely uncertain situations. And I don't know how to forecast this, like, quite frankly, because I think Trevor Lawrence comes back down to earth a little bit this year. That's probably a contrarian take because we always assume, oh, it's only going to get better in the second season with that play caller. It's only going to get better. It's like, man, I think that 10-game stretch that we saw may be the best we'll ever see. And it definitely has been the best we've seen so far from this type of guy. So they're tricky, man. There's a lot of warning signs to say, like, we probably shouldn't copy and paste what happened. But at the same time, like, we like Cohen's system, and obviously he's gotten really good quarterback play wherever he's gone. So the Jags are fascinating. Do you have a read on the wide receiver room? Because this all feels so fragile.
Washington, like, he just looked great. If you're just ball watching,
he was awesome.
And you're dude, he was awesome as a separator on this team. I have a hard time trading for a player like that in a contract year, and his value is only boosted. So he's a player that I'm only trading for like in a combo deal. I'm not like trying to just acquire him and people think like, oh, you know something I don't. Thomas is like a case-by-case basis where the market is totally dependent on what did this person think was going to happen after a wide receiver 4 finish. Because if they thought it was only going to be great forever and they're disappointed, you want to capitalize. I think this team, like, okay, I said this to you off air, and I'm just going to say it again. Liam Cohen is good for this team. He was not great for allowing multiple fantasy like assets to hit the way that we thought they were going to hit. Brian Thomas's usage changed completely. And I worry about having to feed 3 or 4 guys. I also worry about it with Trevor Lawrence because his touchdowns inside the 10-yard line, you're not going to be able to repeat that. Etienne was terrible. Achane, whatever he's called now, was so bad inside the 5 that they brought in Chris Rodriguez, who was awesome in terms of rush success rate. So I think the touchdowns are going to change a little bit for this team. They said they want to do more 12 personnel because they didn't run very well out of 12 personnel last year. I think the buying window for this team, I think Lawrence's price is too high for me. So I don't like, he could repeat and be like a top 10 quarterback. I don't call that a win in Dynasty based on what you're having to trade for him right now. I think you're finding Washington or Thomas as whoever the cheaper one is. That's the guy I want to go after.
Man, they're different players, right? Like, they don't play the same position, obviously. But I think about historically, like, if you just say, like, what has a player done in the first 3 years of their career? And then they have a 5 or 6 game blip where they do that thing for a short period of time. And I'm not saying it wasn't great. It was awesome for Parker Washington. But, like, they didn't go into the season saying, our plan is Parker Washington. They happened to have to use him because of Travis Hunter's season-ending injury and Brian Thomas Jr. disappointed to some degree. So I find myself, like, if there is any window to send Parker Washington away in a trade, I probably would do that. I just don't know that, like, Dynasty players are getting smarter, right? Like, you're not going to sneak one by somebody.
We hope.
So you would hope in that situation. So he's a scary investment because of the short, small sample size. I know it didn't work last year with Brian Thomas. Like, in my mind, you don't go from what you did as a rookie to all of a sudden, like, you can't play in the league. So if there is a guy I'm buying here, whether it be just a bounce back, it's Brian Thomas, or if it isn't with the Jaguars, like, maybe he's a trade candidate at some point soon, and you move on that way. That's where I'm at personally. But yeah, those guys are fascinating for sure. And then what are you doing with Travis Hunter, man? Like, are you just holding? I feel like you just have to hold, right? You took him with the 2nd pick last year in your rookie draft or whatever it was. Like, who knows? Who knows?
Here's the Travis Hunter, like, tribes. Last year in redraft, it was, if you don't pick him, you're a wuss because, you know, because like he could be a yacht, not even a boat, right? We've never seen anybody like this. If you play in an IDP league, you still got to be happy in those kind of formats. In Dynasty, you can't act that way. You can't just say like, oh, I'll just forget about it. He is what he is. You're investing in a player that you hope scores fantasy points for your team at the wide receiver position. And then here's the thing. Are you going to be able to say, I am starting this guy every week as a flex? Apart from leagues where you start 3 wide receivers and 1 or 2 flex, like I don't see a route where you can get there unless one of these other wide receivers is gone. So I think you just hold because people are going to give you not what he could be worth.
Pennies.
And so I'm just waiting for something to change here in the room.
Yeah.
I think the Myers signing was what shocked me the most because at the time it felt like a short-term fix. And then when they gave him the extension, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how is this room sorting out considering what they traded to get Hunter, what they have in Thomas, and what they're going to do moving forward? Do you think Parker Washington is on this team in 2027?
John Shipley does a great job covering the team.
He is great.
He put out I think it was like a predictions column, and it was like, I wouldn't be surprised if Parker Washington got an extension with this team. So if that's what he is potentially thinking, then I will agree.
All right, whether Brian Thomas is traded or not, okay, we can speculate on that. Is he a player that will be more valuable to you in 2027 than he is right now?
I think so.
I think so too. And to me, that says that he's worth a buy.
I agree. I mean, you don't do what he did as a rookie if you're not good at football. You can't just luck into that. So, and there was the wrist injury, right? Remember, Liam Cohen kind of like let that slip at like week 4 or 5 last year. And then there was maybe some off the field stuff. Like I'm just going to zoom out and say this is a first-round wide receiver who was ultra productive as a rookie. Again, year 2, it was a disaster. Nobody can complain about that or dispute that. But that's just, you want to ebb and flow with this stuff, right? It's like, if everybody thinks this is how it's always going to be, I'm probably going to fade that. If people are now always thinking this is the worst it's going to be and it's never going to be better, I'd fade that. So yeah, depending on the trade, or what it costs to get Brian Thomas, I would do that. We talked about that entering this rookie class. It's like, you get to the 107, 106, like that type of range. It's like, I don't know. Brian Thomas is pretty good. Like, are we that excited about Denzel Boston or, whoever it was, Kenyon Sadiq? It's like, I'd probably just take Brian Thomas.
Yeah, and just to give you one more context before we close, like, does Ladd McConkey have the same stench that Brian Thomas Jr. has on him in Dynasty?
I don't think quite as big.
But in terms of expectation of what he did as a rookie, which Ladd also finished as a top 12 wide receiver, and then his drop in fantasy points per game, it's very similar. Thomas's was even more, but Ladd's also in a place now where there are multiple names and a different scheme, and they're probably going to be running more 2 tight ends. Like, there's variables there. The Chargers, imagine that, a team I wanted to bring up, the Chargers. I almost brought them up, but we just need to think about that with Thomas, what he did as a rookie. It's here's the list. Guys to finish as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver as rookie since 2014. Odell Beckham Jr., which was a magical rookie season, if you've forgotten 2014. Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Brian Thomas Jr. That's the crew.
That's a good list to be on.
Yeah, and he's part of that group. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Dynasty Podcast. Make sure you check out everything we have in the Ultimate Draft Kit, and we'll see you again next week. Releases on Monday, so be there. UDK Day.
We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your Dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.